Hi, Dean Castañeda. Thank you for joining me for our conversation today and introduction into you and your time at UMass, your time outside of UMass. I just want to start by giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself outside of the university, what you do in your free time or what you did before UMass.
Sure. So maybe I'll just introduce myself really quickly in terms of just at the university, sort of locate myself. So again, thank you, Claire, for making time to get together and just have this conversation and get to know you better too, in this time we have here. Again, my name is Mari Castañeda, and I'm the new dean of the Commonwealth Honors College, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Communication. So I've been in the department for 20 years. I came here as an assistant professor and then have made my career here at the university since then, largely because I've absolutely loved the department and the university and working with faculty and graduate students and undergraduates and staff. Like, everyone has been so great. And so I have really loved being here, making a career here, doing research, and of course, teaching courses both at the undergraduate and graduate level. So I'm originally from California, from LA specifically. And I tend to go every summer and every winter break to see my family, my son, who is now living out there, and of course my large extended family that lives up and down the coast, but largely in Southern California and in LA specifically. And so I tend to go there for the summer. Of course, this summer is like a summer like no other. So I'm not able to travel out there in the same way. Thank goodness for FaceTime and Zoom, because that's been the way that we've been able to connect, with the family and so forth. But in terms of what I do beyond, just being at the university, is that because a lot of my work is very connected to community-based engagement and research and bringing that into the classroom itself. A lot of times my work and the things that I do outside of the university is very much connected to community events that happen largely in Holyoke, but also in Springfield and sometimes even Amherst. But a lot of the time I actually spend it in Holyoke and at community events that they end up having, that we end up being connected to just because we've developed so many friendships throughout the years there. And my husband, Joseph, who is also a professor at UMass in architecture, and he's a director of civic engagement service learning, also has a studio called the Center for Design Engagement in Holyoke, which ends up hosting a lot of community events and a lot of different, it's a kind of a gathering space. And so that's one of the things that we end up doing. Of course, right now, again, with the pandemic, it's really hard to get together with folks, and we haven't necessarily seen anybody from the community since March. It's all been virtual, but not necessarily in person. But that's one of the places where we spend a lot of time connecting with folks there. And then also just outside of that, just taking a lot of long walks. I'm walking way more than I walked before, which is nice, like around the neighborhood. And you sometimes go to Lake Wyola to kind of relax and swim a little bit, given that it's summer. But a lot of the time, it's really connected to the work that we do, just because my work is also my passion and it's a thing that I'm excited about. So for me, work isn't always feel like work. It feels like, it feels like a lot of fun. And so I hope that lots of people have the opportunity to be in that kind of space where they're working in a place and with things and with people that they just really love and want to be connected to and feel passionate about. And that's a lot of what I get to do with community-based engagement work that I do, which focuses on Latinx communities for the most part, and also thinking about media spaces and how communities already have voices that are being heard through the various different both cultural productions and different media platforms that they create themselves.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's definitely my goal.
Yeah, okay.
I love my work and work outside of the classroom. It seems like from when you're talking, that's a kind of trend in your work between your academic work and your personal life. The idea of engaged scholarship, I noticed you put, is really important in your description of your academic work and what you do. What's the difference between including your engaged scholarship and having that community engagement? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, engaged scholarship is really about recognizing that any kind of community-based work or community-engaged work is actually producing new forms of knowledge, and that anything community-related is not necessarily something that is less than or not as rigorous or as interesting as the more traditional type of, I think, knowledge formation that happens in academic settings, which oftentimes, are treating communities like laboratories and treating communities as somewhere where we get to both study and also like we're contributing something because they don't know enough. And so a lot of my work is trying to challenge that and saying, well, no, actually communities have a lot to offer and already producing all kinds of knowledge that we ourselves are just not recognizing. And so that engaged scholarship is recognizing that those voices are just as important as the other kind of voices that we traditionally tend to privilege within academia itself. And so really understanding that community-based work is important work, and making interventions that are both, scholarly and really documenting within the academic record the voices of community members in terms of what it is that they're doing, whether it's, again, community architecture, or it's urban planning, or whether it's media studies in the area that I work in. And so I think that that's one of the things that I've been trying to do, is making sure that that community engagement isn't seen as something that is not making a contribution, but in fact really is. Joseph and I edited a book called Civic Engagement in Diverse Latinx Communities, Learning from Social Justice Partnerships in Action, and actually has quite a few chapters by Latinx faculty that are working with community members, and largely Latinx, and a whole diversity of Latinx communities, because of course we're not a monolithic and it's not homogeneous, both regionally, ethnically, racially, culturally. And so the book really tries to bring that into account, and the various different ways that engagement is taking place by reciprocal partnerships between faculty, students, and community members. And really trying to demonstrate that there's a lot happening that oftentimes doesn't get acknowledged within scholarly platforms, that are oftentimes not including also our lived experiences of these partnerships and what that looks like. And that's partly what the book was trying to do as well, is bringing those student voices, bringing in the faculty voices, as well as community partner voices in that conversation. So that's kind of a long-winded,
No, it's great.
but yeah, so that's also something that, in terms of just a engaged scholarship, is that community-based scholarship that's community engaged is scholarship. It's producing new forms of knowledge that is important to recognize, as well.
I can say as a student that that's something that's been missing from a lot of my classrooms, but has also been the most rewarding aspect of my time at UMass, is anything that's community engaged that feels like a genuine connection with someone. So I'm interested in, when you're talking, because you said you come from California, how you came here and you made so many genuine community engagements and connections that you were able to work with and build off of. What was that like? How do you make those community ties that are genuine as opposed to, something else?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great question. And do we have all day? we have several hours, right? No, it's something that, of course, so just to sort of contextualize it, I wasn't planning actually to stay at UMass for very long. My plan originally was to come as a new professor, check it out, and sort of build my, of course, my teaching abilities and engaging with faculty here, and then also maybe engaging with community partners. But I really wanted to go back to LA, because that's where I'm from, that's where my family's from. When I came here, my son was 5 years old, and we had been in Southern California for the entire time. And so originally that was the plan, is to go back. But the thing that happens, I think here, there's such a robust community sort of university partnerships that are happening, that in my very first year, I got pulled into a 5-college seminar that was bringing faculty that were working together collaboratively with community partners all over the region, largely Western Massachusetts. And as a result of being pulled into that conversation, and it was like a monthly conversation that was happening with 5 college faculty, I just recognized, like, wow, there's like a lot of possibilities here. There's a lot of work that's happening, and there's a lot of ways that I can get plugged in, which for me was really exciting, because in graduate school at UC San Diego, which is where I went, and also at UCLA, which I went as an undergrad, and we did a lot of community-based work there. But at UC San Diego, I also did a project as part of my, doctoral studies that was looking at U.S.-Mexico connections between community members and faculty. And that project allowed me to go into communities, particularly along the US-Mexico border, and look at oral histories and the ways in which people were, reimagining how we can live life here, especially in a moment which was still very, and it still is, very anti-immigrant, oftentimes very anti-Latino, even though, of course, it's majority Latino in that area. And so having that experience of what a university, its resources, the faculty, the students can do in sort of documenting those lived experiences and making them recognized as important voices that need to be part of the conversation, for me, really inspired me as a graduate student. And so as a result of that, and then coming here, seeing that that same kind of connection and that same kind of work was taking place was very exciting. And so I wanted to connect with folks, and as a result, started thinking about what kind of course could I possibly create that could bring in community partners and students. But, because I didn't know a lot of people, it took me a couple of years of, meeting folks, going to community events, being introduced to people. But it actually was a result, the first class that I created, and which I still taught, and I just taught actually this past spring, is Latinx Media Studies. And that class was created as a result of a community partner, a local Latino media producer contacting me and saying, I heard that you're a professor at UMass, you teach communication, I want to partner with you, I need to do things, and I need you to help me do it. And so I was like, oh, okay. So it was like, okay, let's talk about it. Let's figure out what can we be done. And it ended up being this wonderful partnership between my students. And at the time, his name was Luis Melendez, and he was actually the radio producer for a program called Tertulia on WFCR. And so it was a Sunday night program that still exists, that now is run by other producers, other Latina producers that are doing it now. But we were bringing in fact students every weekend, and we were doing projects where documenting community voices and then bringing them to the radio and then sharing with them in the radio itself. Like, what does it mean to, particularly because in Holyoke, there's a large Puerto Rican community. And so we were able to, at the time we were talking about like, how are folks sort of, what are the politics in the space? How can we make more of these voices heard? What are the issues that folks are feeling like are not being addressed that need to be addressed? And so it was wonderful to partner with him and talk about these issues and have students actually be producers themselves of some of the pieces that were then aired on WFCR on Tertulia. And so that was just like one example, but over the years, there's been so many other partnerships. I've done stuff with Natalia Munoz, who used to have a newspaper in Western Massachusetts, who now works for Holyoke Media, and Vanessa Pavon, who is the producer for Presencia at WGBY in Springfield. And so there's just been all various different people that I've worked with. But it definitely took time to make big connections, because a lot of times also folks from the community were like, UMass has always come into these communities and extracts, but then what does it give it back? And not only like, what does it give back, but why do you leave? And then you don't stay, and then you don't stay connected, and you're not part of the conversations. And so for me, it was really important for people to recognize that I wasn't interested in just sort of doing a pop in and pop out, but really wanted to engage with folks in real positive and productive and meaningful ways that are about utilizing our student knowledge and resources at the university and so forth in ways that can create a really great reciprocal partnership. And really try to think about how do we disrupt things, and how do we change it, and how do we, create more spaces for particularly communities of color voices that oftentimes are happening, but they're not always necessarily included in the same kind of way. And so that as a result of me being connected with 5 college faculty, and those folks also have become wonderful friends over the years, and they've done different projects as well. And so for me, it was that kind of hooked me in, and then it was really hard to go, as a result. Not that I don't go to LA at all. I mean, I visit all the time. I feel very bi-coastal, actually, to be quite honest, because I feel like I spend summers there and then winter break. And for me, that's also really important for me to stay connected with the community, not just my family, but the community in Los Angeles as well. And also for me, it also helps my own work, because I feel like I can compare what's happening with Latinx communities in Southern California, well, how is that similar and different to what's happening to Latinx communities in Western Massachusetts? And what does that mean for like the state of Massachusetts? And what does that mean for the state of California? So I'm all constantly in a state of comparison, particularly between those two coasts, and thinking about, you know, what are the similarities? What are the differences? What, you know, what is history of migration impact the ways in which people, you know, are part of communities or not, and so forth. So for me, it's been also incredibly energizing, you know, to think about those issues as well.
As you're talking, I'm inspired, and I'm thinking a lot about, you know, you mentioned media a bunch of times, and communication is your specialty. It's what you study. How does that fit into this big picture you're showing us of all your work? How do you choose communication? Where does communication fall in doing this kind of work?
That's a great question. And I mean, also just like, why even like major in communication and then get a PhD in communication as well, right? Because as an undergraduate, I did major in communication, and it was a program, when I was an undergraduate, you had to apply for. It wasn't something that you could just easily just major in. And so it was a very, very small program itself. But for me, the thing that was very exciting is that I took classes with professors that also talked about media power and political economy, and really thinking about the intersections between economics, politics, and culture of shaping the kind of media resources and kind of media landscapes that we see. And so for me, that really, you know, instigated a lot of questions like, yeah, why is it this way? Although my mom will say that I always ask that question. She says that I was always looking at TV and looking like, well, why isn't it very diverse? Or I mean, of course, we didn't use the word diverse language at the time, but I would say like, why aren't there enough people that look like me on television? Why is it that it's not necessarily, you know, it doesn't include a lot of different kinds of people? It certainly wasn't representing the community that I was coming from. And so I always had that kind of curiosity and questions of like, why is it this way? And then of course, majoring in communication, being really inspired by it, and, you know, taking classes with also Chicano studies scholars at UCLA as well as an undergrad, bringing that combination for me was very exciting. And I felt like I wanted to get a PhD to continue, you know, do those investigations. But for me, the thing that really inspired, one of the things that really inspired me as well was that when I was an undergraduate, in 1992, that's when we had the LA Rebellion happen as a result of the Rodney King trial and the police officers not being basically, you know, found not guilty. And the outbreak that happened with regards to people uprising and saying enough is enough. And of course we're seeing that again, right? In 2020, we're seeing that all over again. And I was an undergraduate at that time, and there was a professor at the university where I was at, where he was going to give a lecture. It was actually time to do our exams. And rather than doing an exam, he did a whole history of the history of race relations in the US and the ways that it connects to issues of power and, you know, economic inequalities and racial inequalities. It was one of the most powerful lectures I had ever heard. And it inspired me. Like I said, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to study. That's what I want to look at, you know, because he was breaking it down in a way that started making sense. And I was like, okay, this is why this is happening right now. You know, there is a longer history here that, that this is not just something that happened overnight. And so what do we do about it? How do we change it? How do we participate? And one of the things that he also talked about is the role that media plays, both in the coverage that was happening at the time with regards to the LA Rebellion and the uprising, but also the role that media has played historically in trying to create certain narratives about communities, who's included and who's not included in the making of the nation. And so for me, all those things were intersected, where media and communication were not these things that exist in a vacuum, but were very much connected to this larger social, political context that we live in. And so that for me was like very eye-opening, inspiring, and wonderful. And I said, I want to study that. And I also want to be in a classroom with other students and like talk about this and, you know, try to think about how can we inspire each other in these kinds of questions, in these kinds of issues. And as a result, I ended up applying to grad school and got into the PhD program at UC San Diego. And also there, also worked very closely with really wonderful faculty. In fact, I just heard from my advisor 2 days ago. His name's Dan Schiller, who's now retired, but he emailed me like, hey, how are you doing? How are things going? And so it's wonderful to still stay very connected to my doctoral advisor after all these years. And he also was very inspirational with asking these kinds of questions because he was a political economy of communication scholar. And so for me, these questions of equity and inequity are very much rooted to issues of race, the intersections with regards to not just gender, but also class, and politics. And so these things are very much intersecting. And what is the role that media play in both exasperating that or creating opportunities and possibilities of dismantling that? And so for me, that's also part of what I'm interested in examining and being very curious about, but also wanting to do something about it. For me, it's not just about simply studying it, but then how do we put it into action? And community-based work is one of the ways that I feel like I could put it into action, because, you're now a producer and you're now like doing this work of being an anchor and so forth. And so that's one of the ways that you make that intervention and contributed to those conversations. My work, I'm not necessarily going to be on television, and that's okay, because I'm more like on behind the scenes and teaching classes, but I want to be able to then engage with students in these kind of spaces of thinking about how communities are also disrupting that themselves, even if they're not necessarily in public media spaces or mainstream spaces. Although increasingly public media is one of the places where we're seeing the ability to include more diverse voices and to be able to disrupt those, oftentimes stereotypical and really negative narratives, particularly of communities of color, as well. So that's sort of like the thing that inspired me, and that I still feel really passionate and really excited about. In fact, there's so many things I want to look at, and there's not enough time, things I want to examine and think about and write about and study. And now that I'm becoming dean, or now that I've become dean, it's, I find that it's harder to find time, but I am reserving some time during the week to stay connected to, like, why did I enter this in the first place? Because if I don't stay connected to the writing and the thinking and the reading and the examining and reflecting, I feel like that fuels my work, and that fuels both my administrative work, but also my teaching. And so I got to stay rooted to that as well. Otherwise, I feel like I'll lose why I wanted to enter into academia and into being in the university as a professor and doing research and engaging with students in the first place. So I don't want to lose that, because, then I would be very sad, if that happened. And luckily, I'm able to reserve some time during the week to be able to do that. And it's making me very happy. Like, I feel like it fuels me and makes me excited to continue doing that work and examination, so that I can then during the week do the other stuff that needs to happen, but then I can reserve some time to be reflective and think and think critically about some of these issues. I think right now we need more voices out there critiquing and challenging and rethinking and reimagining what this world could possibly look like, because that's what we need right now more than ever, as well.
There's so many things I wanted to go back to, but what you just said, I want to elaborate on, because I think that's so relevant for a lot of students right now. And a lot of members of our community, in two parts, right? First, in how do you stay engaged with your work and what you're passionate about with everything going on right now, and with other complications in your life. I think that we were talking about community, and we were talking about passion and what makes people really want to do what they want to do. And a lot of that comes into why people are at school and what they're doing. But this year is going to look dramatically different for a lot of students. As you're able to do that in your own life, what's your advice maybe for students that are trying to navigate that in different situations they find themselves in?
That's the thing, is trying to figure out, like, how do we stay connected to communities, both communities with other students, communities with faculty, and communities within the spaces that we live in and occupy, right, in terms of our own sort of space. And I think the thing that I would say in terms of, students trying to make sense of, how do we still thrive in this space and in this moment in time? Because that's the question for me, is constantly of, I don't want to just survive. I also want to thrive, even in the midst of the difficulty, even in the midst of it being hard, being remote and not connected in real person, in real life, in the sense of like face to face. Of course, we're still connected in real life right here, right now, you and me. And for me, like, this is energizing. Like, this is beautiful, because this is exactly what we need. Exactly. Like, we need to then be able to say, okay, so what's the stuff that makes us excited about the everyday? What is it that makes us, energized about our lives and the work that we do? And for me, it's about connecting with other people, having conversations, unpacking things together, trying to, again, think things through about what could be possible, now and in the future. Recently, I also been thinking a lot about, how can we have the future in the present? is something that I've been thinking about as a way of trying to imagine how can we not just wait for the future, but have the future here right now? Like, how do we engage with it in addition to being present in the present, as well. And so the reality of recognizing that things may not necessarily be 100% the same moving forward. I mean, we don't know how this is all going to pan out in the end. And certainly, our lives have been altered and will continue to be altered, for sure. So then how do we, make the most of what we have right now? And how do we make the most of these possibilities of connecting, online, or even the possibilities of new work that might be emerging, new ways of thinking, new ways of writing, new art pieces that might be emerging as a result of that, new questions that are being asked. I just think that, and also old questions, like how, persisting and consistently being clear about the fact that there's still things that we still have to be addressed that haven't been 100% sort of recognized or addressed fully, that we still need to sort of do some really serious work with. For instance, economic inequalities, racial injustice. I mean, these questions are ongoing. And so we definitely don't want to lose sight of those as well. But at the same time, thinking what else are the things that we're not having at the table that we can utilize in this time. So I would say, it's important to try to make the effort to connect with other folks as best as possible, because I think that's the thing that's going to get us through. I mean, I think for me during this time is the thing that has saved me is to, actually, being dean and transitioning over, I've had lots of Zoom meetings, like in the last 2 months in particular, like tons. And I have to say that despite the fact that they're just like constantly being meetings, I'm loving seeing people. Like, I'm just loving seeing them even, and I also am reinterpreting the black boxes. And this is my son who mentioned this. And I thought that this was wonderful. It's looking at these black boxes, not as boxes, but as windows, because if we're seeing them as windows into each other's lives, windows into new ways of thinking. And I love the idea of being able to see it that way, because it becomes more open as opposed to more closing. And so, like, opening up versus closing it up. And so I really appreciate that. And then as a result, my engagement, even with you right here, right now, becomes very different, because I see it as a window as opposed to just simply this box where you're so far away, because I see you like right here, like very close by. So I think that that's the other piece is thinking about, as opposed to what is it that we don't have, as opposed to what is it that we have right now, and what are the possibilities, and are we willing to have that openness to be able to reimagine that and think about what's possible, as opposed to only what we've lost. Because of course we've lost a lot, and I don't think that we should not recognize that and mourn that, because that's very real, both in terms of friends and family members, maybe as a result of COVID, and as a result of the various different police brutalities that have happened over the years. I mean, those are very real, but at the same time, recognizing that what are the other things that could possibly be available to us that perhaps weren't available to us before. And I feel like I'm connecting a lot more with people more intimately as a result of doing more Zoom calls and connections that have been done before. There's something very intimate about like seeing people really close up front, as a result of being on the computer. And then also sometimes seeing people's homes. I mean, you get to see where I work from, at home in my office, which I love to have lots of color, and my son's old, kindergarten, paintings and drawings and stuff like that. But I think that that's the other piece is thinking, shifting our thinking of, not only about the loss, but also about the possibilities, what are the possibilities here? And also having agency, recognizing we have agency right now. You know what I mean? We're not passive victims. We could do things, and what are they then? Given the limited context, what can we still do to thrive in this moment and not just simply survive in this moment? Because I know that for me, that's what I want to do. And as a result of that shift in that thinking, I feel like I've been able, despite everything, to feel a lot of joy in my life. And that's what I want to feel. I want to feel excited to be alive and to recognize that this is the moment I have. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't even know what's going to happen next year. But right here, right now, I get to be with you and I get to enjoy this conversation and we get to connect. And that for me, that's really deeply meaningful and that's really important. So how do we make the most of that as well? And really being present for the things that we're being called to do and being called to participate in, whether it's our courses, whether it's work, whether it's community engagement, whether it's with our families, how can we be also more present in the moment. I think that's the other thing that I want to really practice, and I would love for students to really think about, what does that look like and what does that mean? Because when you really do that, you start really feeling so fully alive, and really embrace like the energy that I think really exists in this universe, seeming coming through us, in really powerful ways. At least, I mean, I know it can be very like la la land, in some ways, but I feel like I have no other way to live. Like I can't think of it in any other way, because it is the thing that then makes me feel excited about getting up in the morning, as opposed to dreading the morning. I don't feel like I dread it, even in the midst of everything. But it's hard. It takes a real serious, change of thinking, a real different mindset. But if we could do that, then you start feeling like it's the impossible is possible, and I think about so many other people that have gone through so many more difficult times. I mean, I think about our ancestors, like in terms of all the things that people went through for us to be here today. And so if people can really survive and thrive as a result of that, and then I'm here, I'm sure I can do this too, in this particular moment in time, also.
I love your attitude about all of this, because it's so needed. And I think, you're talking about in a very uplifting way, and that's so important. And I haven't heard a lot of that. I think it's very easy for a lot of us as students to slip into what is happening, everything. And you said agency, a lot of things feel really out of control. And what you were saying reminds me of an essay by Arundhati Roy called "The Pandemic as a Portal."
Mm-hmm.
How there's a transitioning, and we can choose what we bring through with us.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
As we're thinking about the campus and what it might look like, and you're transitioning into this role, following that concept, what might we bring with us out of this time? What might we bring into the fall? What might the fall look like in that realm of possibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a slowing down that has taken place, right? A slowing down of as a result of us being now remotely, being at home, and of course the lockdown that happened originally, but even continuous. I mean, we may not be in traditional lockdown, but everyone's really being encouraged to stay home as much as possible. And as a result of that, there's been a slowing down that's taken place, that I think that there's real opportunity of really looking at ourselves and really thinking more deeply about, so who do I want to be in the world? What do I want to be like? What are the things that I still need to work on, to grow, to deepen my own connection with myself, but also with other people? How can I use this opportunity to really engage with ideas, maybe books, maybe all kinds of wonderful online materials that are there that can really help me rethink how we're going to be in the future, in some ways. And so recently a student was telling me that they were mentioning in our student advisory board earlier today, that they've been taking the opportunity to really read. And there's been a lot of books that they haven't necessarily been able to read that they really are now enjoying in a very deep way that they hadn't necessarily had the opportunity before. And I think part is because we're always rushing and running from one thing to the next. And as a result of the slowing down and really sort of assessing this moment, that it sort of presents opportunities to really be more reflective, and really thinking about how, when we get out of this, how do I want to be? Do I want things to be the way they were before, or do I want them to be different? And if I want them to be different, how can I participate in making that happen, right now? And in terms of, the college, and in terms of moving forward, I mean, certainly we're going to be, doing things as much as possible that connect to the sort of the regular things that we do all the time. For instance, of course, we're now hopefully it's not going to be pizza and prof, but I heard it's going to be dinner and discussion is going to be the sort of the way that we're going to be like engaging with students. Zoom, there was great ideas that came up in the student advisory board about how do we still stay connected as a community, because this is the resiliency that we need, right? Like we can easily just fall apart, and then just sort of wallow away, or we can gather together and connect and really think about how do we build resilience together as a community, and what does it take, and what does that mean? And a lot of it is going to mean that we have to be more intentional about reaching out to people and being more intentional about how we're going to be in these spaces and in the world. And so in terms of the college, I really also want us to think more intentionally about what is our purpose? What is our mission? What is the benefit and the beauty of a college, of an honors college education? What does that bring to students' lives that perhaps, you know, if you're not necessarily doing that curriculum and being part of those classrooms and being engaged with those students and faculty, that maybe you get the benefits of that as a result of being in those conversations. And those, I think that the beauty of those courses is that they're so small that they do allow for those kind of deep engagement and dialogue. Not that they don't happen in person, because they certainly happen in person as well, but that's the thing that ultimately is the most important piece. Like, it's not the buildings or, you know, the classroom space itself. It's about the connections that we build with other people and with each other. And so thinking about, you know, what could be possible, you know, in this moment, while at the same time recognizing that it's not going to be necessarily 100% the same moving forward. But is that, you know, of course, it's sad because a lot of people do want the same thing. And so I think that there's parts of that we can definitely retain. But at the same time, I feel really excited about, you know, what could happen? What are the possibilities? I mean, I don't know just yet, you know, of course, because we're in the middle of it and trying to figure it out. But I'm also excited to think about ways of doing things that perhaps, you know, we hadn't really thought about before, that were not possible because there's something about being physically in person makes it harder. Now this becomes another way of engaging. For instance, I feel like we can engage more with our alumni, you know, and I think a lot of alumni, especially young alumni that just graduated that I've heard from, they're like, what are you all doing? How can I stay connected? You know, how can I hear what's going on? How can I, you know, listen in? I want to still learn. Like, this notion of lifelong learning is something that people are really interested in, and saying, just because I graduated and moved on doesn't mean that I don't still want to be connected. Doesn't mean I still want to learn and hear what's going on. How do we make sense of what's going on at this particular moment in time? And so I think as students, it's a wonderful opportunity to take that time to really do that and unpack that in a way that is very unique and different than you don't always get to have once you graduate. And so I always feel like undergraduate experience is so connected to the ability to go deep in these issues for 4 or 5 years. It gives us the opportunity to really sort of think about these things that I think oftentimes I hear from alumni that have graduated and said, oh, what I miss the most is being in the classroom and engaging with my classmates and with the faculty and asking these questions and reading material that's helping me make sense of things, and that is allowing for these other new portals, you know, because the classroom becomes a portal itself, you know, into other ways of thinking and imagining and discussing and historicizing, but then also bringing it to the present. And I think that once folks graduate, having a lot of those opportunities become few and far in between. And so this is a very special moment that, regardless of whether even though we're remote, it's still possible to do that. And in fact, I think it's even more important than ever to be willing to be engaged and to be present and to be willing to engage in those hard conversations that I think are so necessary, that I think, you know, really build that resilience and really build the ability to then have these frameworks that when you graduate, you're able to then contribute to the communities that you're a part of, you know, and be able to move things forward in a way that benefit and include many people, you know, not just certain groups of people, right? So that we can sort of think about ourselves as really moving forward a social and racial justice ethos that is inclusive of all folks. Because I think if we really address those issues, we are then able to address all the other issues as well. You know, if you put social justice as the front and center issue, as a framework of thinking about things, all other things follow. And so if we do that, I think that we can create a more just and equitable and a world that lots of people feel like they really do belong. And we could rethink policies that right now really are, you know, demeaning and violent towards people, that are not unnecessarily so, that don't have to be, it doesn't have to be this way. And so how can we, you know, create something different and use this opportunity and together to be able to do that, to at least think it through and imagine that, because all the students will eventually become, you know, lawyers and doctors and teachers and professors and researchers and scientists and, you know, theater, you know, actors and, you know, performers and all, you know, artists, like all kinds of things. And so how do you bring that experience to bear in the lifelong work that you do and in the lifelong learning that you'll be engaged with as well?
I agree with everything you're saying, and it's so wonderful to hear somebody in a leadership position, specifically of my college, saying everything that you're saying. And I think it's so powerful. When you do look at the Honors College, because you touched on this briefly, why the Honors College? What's the potential in the Honors College? Because we're talking about community in different spaces, and that's a specific one that you're entering and leading. So I just, what are your thoughts about the potential there?
Absolutely. I mean, ever since I became a faculty member at UMass, I've been very involved with Honors College students because I've always, either taught an honors seminar or have been a faculty advisor for students that have done honors thesis, and have loved the opportunity to really spend a whole year examining a particular issue, question, topic, and really going deep and looking at all the different possibilities and engaging in a very frequent conversation about what does this mean. And what I recognize is that, honors college students, many students, of course, college students are eager to learn, but what I find with honors college students is that there is really this burning desire of wanting to do something, of using that opportunity of like real theoretical, empirical, intellectual engagement at a very deep level of being able to then say, it needs to make a difference in the world. I want to make a difference in the world. How does this opportunity to then work very closely in a laboratory or in a studio space or, doing a discourse analysis? I mean, there's so many wonderful theses that students create as a result of doing the honors curriculum and then having the opportunity to then do a thesis, that my experience from students is that they're eager to be able to not just simply, again, it's not about the Latin honors and it's not about the distinction. Those things are important, and certainly people absolutely appreciate it and appreciate those and are aiming for those as well. But what I see is that they're aiming for more than just that. They're aiming for the ability to engage with their curiosity of the questions that they're eager to investigate and examine and think through a little bit more deeply in conversation and in dialogue and in partnership with other classmates and with faculty. And the ability to be able to have that space to do that is so powerful, because those are the things that stay with you the most as you graduate and move on to either graduate school or a career, whatever career you end up having. Those experiences and those questions and those ways of thinking about certain issues, what I've seen over the years from students is that they come back and say, I still remember that conversation that we had, or all of a sudden I'll get an email out of the blue from someone that says, I wanted to share this article with you because it reminded me of the conversation that we had in our honors thesis seminar, or we did this project together. And so I see the honors college students as really having this burning desire to want to think about how can I make good in the world, with the work that I'm doing, and really investigate that, and then carry that forward in whatever work I do. Because I've also seen students, as a result of doing their work, carry on to graduate school or carry it on to the work that they end up doing in careers. And I think that that's really powerful and amazing. And there's something really special about having space to really look at something deeply, like just really sink your teeth into it and really examine it and explore it and look at it from different angles and think about it in this really reflective and reflective and embodied way that in some ways feels very sacred. It really feels like a wonderful opportunity, and in some ways a little luxurious, like this wonderful thing of being able to just spend some time on examining issues, whether it's in the classroom or through the thesis, that gives you the opportunity to really think deeply about questions that you may have about whatever topic it is that you're looking at. And students that want to spend that time doing that are the ones that oftentimes are also interested in wanting to make some kind of contribution into the world as a result of that deep thinking. And for me, that's really exciting. And that's the thing that makes me feel really honored to be the dean of the Honors College, but also one of the reasons why I wanted to be part of the Honors College in a much more deeper way, to be able to have those kinds of conversations with students about how can we create that space for all students, ultimately in the Honors College, but I would love that for all students across the campus, to be able to have those kinds of opportunities, because that's where I think transformation takes place. And if we think about education as a pathway toward liberation, that is what we're aiming for the Honors College to be, a pathway towards liberation as a result of those educational opportunities and those educational spaces to think and question and engage in dialogue and really unpack in a way that you really are making an impact in the world.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you, and I want to be conscious of your time. So is there anything I didn't add or I didn't ask that you would really want to add that community members watching this might need to know or want to know about you?
Well, thank you, Claire, for taking time to get together. And I mean, I hope we have more conversations, especially about your thesis, moving forward. I'd love to hear more as you're working through that. I think that one thing that I just would like to end is that I really feel like the Honors College is such a special place. It really is a place where students are, along with faculty and the staff, really connecting and really committed to thinking about how do we use these spaces that we have for conversation and dialogue to think deeper about the issues that we're engaging with. And then using this opportunity for students to cultivate the kind of ways of investigating and thinking so that they can take that with themselves out if they go in the world. And I think it's a special place because, there's not a lot of places where we can get together in these small classes and really, look at issues in a much more, in a collaborative, reciprocal, dialogic, way that, hopefully is inclusive of everybody. And I think that there's still work to do, of course, in any place, like in the college and any other, educational institution, always has more work to do to improve and to do better, both in terms of inclusiveness, diversity, in terms of a wide range of classes. And so I'm really eager to hear from students in particular, what are the things that they see really works really well, and they'd love to make sure that we don't lose sight of those pieces, even in the moment of being remote, that are really important. And what are the things that we can really improve and that we need to be challenged, to be able to bring that to bear, to make sure that, that we could continue doing better at what it is that we're doing, because there's always room for improvement. And so I'm really eager to hear that from students as well, because I think it's gonna make the experience deeper for all of us, in this space, and again, keeping the specialness of the college, really front and center. And that specialness, I think, is because of the way that it brings people together. But ultimately, if we really have the social justice framework really centered, I think that the possibilities of what we can do is really amazing as well.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to see what we do in the next year and all your work at the Honors College. I'm very excited.
Thank you, Claire.
So thank you for talking with me, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too. Enjoy a beautiful day outside.
Thanks, you too.